Hello and welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Speaking of the Weather, released in 1937. It's the 392nd in the series and is directed by Frank Tashlin. You find this on the Looney Tunes Gone Collection Volume 3 DVD set. No HD version has surfaced yet. Hopefully one day that will happen, as this one would look pretty good in HD, I would think. And unfortunately I can't show you the full cartoon here. That's just due to copyright. The cartoon's under copyright, so if I try and upload it, it'll just get blocked. If you really need to see it, again, I have a link below to the Looney Tunes Gone Collection Volume 3, which I highly recommend you purchase, especially if you're a Looney Tunes fan. So in case you haven't seen this one, this is the first of 3 Frank Tashlin's Things Coming to Life trilogy, or specifically in this one, pulp magazines. And we just see a whole bunch of different gags and puns, and eventually we see a crook that escapes and causes mischief, and then again through many puns, we see the crook getting captured. So there's not really much by way of story here, but I'll definitely go through that. Usually I would put a re-edit of the original audio commentary, but this time around, because there's so much to cover, I thought I'd do it all from scratch. You're going to then hear from my good friend Austin Kelly, who is a self-professed Tashlin-holic, and he's going to give his observations on this short. And because it's also a Merry Melody short, my good friend Matty Cruz, the tuning tenor, he's going to discuss the music of this short, as once again it's a Merry Melody short that is promoting a song. So this short could be considered somewhat of a cheater short. It uses a lot of animation from previous shorts, and some of them is actually even quite interesting with the choices that Tashlin made. I'll go into why I think he did it this way in a few moments, but let's go through what was repeated from previous shorts. So first up, we see repeated animation from the Coconut Grove. So you see the caricatures of Ned Sparks, Hugh Herbert, and Tarzan. We see a little bit from The Miller's Daughter, so when the dancers are waltzing, that little silhouette part, that comes from that. We see a little bit from Those Were Wonderful Days, where we see the boxers waltzing in from the beginning bit. We see some animation of the Dancing Flowers, that comes from Flowers for Madame. Toy Town Hall, which itself was a bit of a cheater cartoon. Animation of the toys cheering, that's where that comes from. Way back in 1933, the short I've Got to Sing a Torch Song, which is not a great short, but anyway. The animation of the Boswell sisters is reused here when they sing the whole Speaking of the Weather. I wonder if they reanimated the mouths just to lip sync to the new song versus the old one that they sung, where the animation comes from. I don't know, but anyway. Buddy's Beer Garden, which Tashlin himself actually animated on. So the animation of the tongue sandwiches, that's reused from there. The animation of the Dancing Lobster, that comes from How Do I Know It's Sunday? From Porky in the North Woods, so Tashlin himself directed that one. So you've got a brief bit of the animation of animals running, which is very odd. Some of these reuses of animation are so brief. You think, why go through the effort of repeating the animation when wouldn't it be quicker just to do something quickly for those few seconds? But anyway, I'm sure there's a reason for it. We have, from everyone's favorite cartoon, Buddy of the Apes, the animation of the African natives running towards the camera, and that gets reused a lot. In fact, in one short, they even reuse that particular shot and they trace over Native Americans instead. I don't know why that shot was considered really good to reuse, but anyway, whatever. From Buddy the Gob, the animation of the Navy ships heading towards the camera, that one shot also gets reused quite a few times, especially in World War II, once obviously they're featuring Navy shots. Probably the most interesting reuse is from Riding Bosco. There is a shot of cowboys running towards the camera. The fact that they're using a Harmon and Ising short for repeats, I just thought that was fascinating, to be honest. And the whole pinball gag sequence that comes from Sunday Go to Meeting Time, where the African American in the original short gets replaced by our villain in this one. Honestly, there might be one or two more, but these are the ones that I could find. So if you know that there's any more repeated animation in this one, definitely let me know in the comments below. So this one also features a lot of caricatures, so we'll go through that right now. So we open up with Bob Burns, who appeared in the beginning as Bob Boynes, playing what he called the bazooka, and that's what he famously called his trombone. He was an American musical comedian, and he appeared in radio and movies from 1930 to 1947. According to Keith Scott, in his Cartoon Voices book, he was voiced here by Tex Avery. Yes, Tex Avery actually voiced him here. I didn't know that. Wow. That was the biggest surprise in revisiting this short. We then see musician Ted Lewis, and he appears at the beginning saying his catchphrase, "Is everybody happy?" So he was an American entertainer, band leader, singer, and musician. Here he's voiced by Dave Weber. We briefly see Ned Sparks gradually replying, "No." He was a Canadian-born character actor of American stage and screen, and he had his nasal monotone delivery, and again, he's voiced by Dave Weber. We see Hugh Herbert peering throughout the cartoon giggling, and it's funny because the repeated animation comes from Coconut Grove, and sure enough, the article even shows Coconut Grove in terms of a promotion, which is interesting. He was an American comedian, and he began his career in vaudeville and wrote many plays and sketches, and he had the trademark sound, the woohoo. So if you hear that sound in a lot of the cartoons, that's where it comes from. And if he also says wonderful, wonderful, again, that comes from him. We see Leopold Stokowski conducting The Storm, which I'm sure my friend Manny Cruz, the Toonie Tenor, is going to go through, because he hasn't done The Storm enough in these reviews, but he'll no doubt mention that. But Leopold Stokowski, he is especially noted for his freehand conducting style, and most people would know him from Fantasia. That's probably his most famous thing he did later on. It's kind of weird, though, in this short, he starts with a baton and then he just disappears, and then he composes in the way he normally does via freehand. Here he's voiced by Mel Blanc. So the Boswell sisters, they sing the title song, and they were an American close harmony singing trio of the jazz and swing eras, and it had 3 sisters, and a few years after this, they would actually split up and go their own separate ways. Keith Scott's actually not sure who voiced these sisters in this short. He's got question marks, so hopefully that mystery will be solved one day. This is pretty obscure. Lydia Pinkham, and we see here she's Lydia Puncombe, and she's not even a Hollywood celebrity or anything. I mean, she ogles Clark Gable, but she was actually an American inventor and a marketer of a herbal alcoholic women's tonic, and supposedly that helped with menstrual and menopausal problems, but nowadays it's deemed as quackery, and it was called Pinkham's Vegetable Compound, and she's voiced by Mel Blanc in that shot. And as mentioned, Clark Gable's in the same shot, and he's on the cover of the Woman's Home Companion. That's a nice little joke there, of course. He was a famous actor. He's probably the only celebrity most people may recognize in this short, possibly Stokowski too, but it'd be probably more him. His most well-known roles are Gone with the Wind and It Happened One Night, of which he won an Oscar, and definitely need to see that film. It's pretty good. Once again, we make fun of Greta Garbo and her very large feet. If you watch a lot of shorts with big feet, it's Greta Garbo. She was a Swedish-American actress and regarded as one of the greatest screen actresses of all time, and she very famously shunned publicity. We see Warner Oland as Charlie Chan, and he was a Swedish-American actor, and his career included time on Broadway and lots of film appearances. He would be cast a lot during this time as Chinese or Chinese-American characters like Fu Manchu, Henry Chang, and notably, as shown here, Charlie Chan, and he did so in 16 films, and is voiced by Mel Blanc. And yes, I'm aware, it's not acceptable today. You would actually cast someone of Chinese descent to play a Chinese character. I get it, but it's a product of its time, and it is what it is. Walter Winchell, here is Walter Snitchell, and he says one of his catchphrases, "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. North America." He was a syndicated American newspaper gossip columnist and a radio news commentator. And his history is pretty interesting if you want to definitely look into that. We see Johnny Weissmuller doing his Tarzan yell, and he was an American Olympic swimmer, water polo player, and he was an actor known for, you guessed it, Tarzan, voiced by Mel Blanc here. We see William Powell investigating as the Thin Man, and he's literally thin here, but anyway. And he was an American actor, and that's probably his most well-known role, but he's done a lot of other good stuff too. It's definitely worth checking out. And just to round it off in terms of voice acting, Billy Bletcher does the voice of the convict and the judge. So, let's get into some of the other trivia for this short. So this is the first color Tashlin short, and his first Merry Melody short too. So when he came back to the studio for the second time, remember the first time he came, he was as an animator, he then left, and then he came back again as a director, and he would start off doing Porky Pig shorts, which he notoriously hated doing, but being the professional that he was, he still directed the shorts, and he's made some very notable shorts as well, and those reviews are already on the channel too, so if you want to check them out for further details. And as mentioned before, this is the first of Tashlin's books coming to life trilogy, so he would do this one, and then he would do 2 others, including the final one, which will be the last short he would do for the studio before leaving once again and heading over to Disney. And then he will do other things, and eventually he will come back to Warner Brothers in the mid-40s. Now, one observation I had here is, especially when looking at the case of Stuttering Pig, which is his masterpiece, I believe that this one was done as a sort of cheater, in a way, just for Tashlin to get back on schedule because of the amount of reused bits that were used. I do have to wonder, though, was he aware of all the things to reuse for this short? Did he have an encyclopedic knowledge about, oh, I remember the tongue sandwiches from the Buddy short I did, or I remember those cowboys from Ride and Bosco? Like, was it him remembering all that, or did someone tell him once the storyboard was done to say, oh, look, you can use a dancing lobster here from How Do I Know It's Sunday? I'm just trying to figure out how on earth this would have been done. Was it him or somebody else that knew all of this? And as mentioned, it's crazy how even the Bosco short had footage reused, and it's just for something that's just very basic too, just one quick little cowboy shot. And is reusing animation like this really time effective, since some bits are only a few seconds long? But anyway, for those of you that know more about the animation process, let me know in the comments, would reusing animation in this case really save that much time or not? Now, before I get to the cartoon bit by bit, from start to finish on the other bits, I wanted to point out that a lot of the pulp magazines that you see in the short there actually were real. And I'll point out a few, but I'm not going to do each and every one because I'll be here forever if I went into each one. But chances are, if you pause the short and you see the name of a magazine, if you look it up on Google, you'll not only be able to see the history most likely, but some sites even have complete databases of all the magazines and whatever that came out at the time. And also keep in mind the era that this short came out. It came out in 1937, and this was still a year or so shy of Superman appearing in a comic book. Pulp magazines were still the main thing that people would buy, and they would be filled with things like adventure stories and crime stories and things of that nature. So there wasn't really anything superhero around this time. It was Superman that would end up starting all of that, and that would come again after this. So these are really more pulp magazines versus actual comic books as we know them today. Alright, let's look at the cartoon. So, I love the animation of this trombone bazooka instrument in the beginning. This may be a cheated cartoon, but it has a lot of great bits of animation in this one, despite that, and that bit is definitely a highlight for me. I definitely had a big chuckle over the whole, is everybody happy? And we see Ned Sparks straight away going, no. That made me laugh a lot, and it still does, even though I've seen this cartoon quite a few times. So we see House and Garden, again, real magazine. Some of these might still be around today. I think House and Garden is, I'm not sure, but let me know if that's the case. And again, if I do miss out on any magazines, and if you think that there was an important detail I missed, let me know in the comments, because I definitely want to know, and I'm sure everyone else does as well. Then, and we see this very brief moment on the tail of this particular suit just celebrating in the air. I thought that was a weird bit of animation, but okay, whatever. It's something weird and funny. And we see, yep, there's a few magazines here. Better Homes and Gardens is real. The Toot is a real magazine. Radioland is a real magazine. And a lot of these aren't around today, but again, you can definitely look them up in terms of the history. I'm not sure on Best Foods magazine, though I would imagine there would be something similar to that name. But Blunder Bread is a reference to Wonder Bread, which was one of the first companies to sell pre-sliced bread. Yeah, only a few years before this short was made, sliced bread was available, like pre-sliced bread. Before that, you'd buy a loaf and cut it at home. I guess that's where that expression, the greatest thing since sliced bread, that comes from, And Photoplay was a real film magazine at the time as well. I'm not sure where the slogan, "You won't crab when you eat our lobsters." I'm sure there must have been some sort of a popular seafood restaurant or something. I tried looking it up. Could be a radio slogan, I'm not sure, but again, if you know, let me know in the comments. We get a great little gag of the crook getting into the vault. The magazine just happens to have a vault on the cover there, which I liked. That was pretty good. And I love the confession in, a nice little pun there, True Confessions book. Because why not? We gotta love a good pun, don't we, right? And when we see the judge, for a very brief second, you see this judge has a tattoo of a woman. I thought that was bizarre. I never really noticed that before. Every time I see this short, I always notice something new, which is always a great thing. It has great replayability in those cases. And we see that life, of course, is used as a pun for life in jail. And this is not the first nor the last time that would be done. And what's this? He's able to get out of a book that was called Liberty. Fantastic. Love that. And of course, we get a nice little dad joke where Walter Schnitzel, like, was he chicken or something? Anyway, Schnitzel, whatever. Looking into a magazine called Look. The Look magazine was also real, by the way. We see a reference to Ray Katz, who was a producer at the studio at the time on the cover of Police Gazette. American Boy was a real magazine dedicated to, well, boys, of course, something that they would read, and you can imagine once Superman and the superheroes comics started coming out, boys would more than likely read those instead. Boys Life, that's a Boy Scout magazine, which I now know is still going on, but they changed the name to Scouts Life, so that one has had a very long life. And we see the name Melvin Miller, who was a gag writer at Warner Brothers at the time. So I wonder if he wrote part of this. Maybe he did. Maybe that's why his name was inserted. I don't know. We see the Wild West Weekly, and that was originally dime novels, and it was acquired by Street and Smith, and here it's parodied, and they turned it into a pulp magazine. So they basically were a pulp magazine publisher at the time. We then see further references to Melvin Miller, and we see reference to Freeling and animator Volney White, who would have animated on this short. And we see R. Wolf, and I'm not sure who R. Wolf is. If you know, let me know in the comments. And the dog saying, "That's my pop." That's a reference to a comic strip by Milt Gross called, well, That's My Pop. We see in the background Hard to Digest in the background, which is a reference to Reader's Digest. Beautiful. Love that. Maybe someone doesn't like Reader's Digest. I don't know. We see the Saturday Evening Post. That's a real magazine with links to the magazine The Gazette that was published by Benjamin Franklin. Western Story Magazine. Again, that was a real magazine there. And one final reference for you. 20,000 Years in Sing Sing. So that was a real book, and that actually was adapted into a 1932 movie starring Spencer Tracy. Wow. Lots of references for you. So I've been prattling on way long enough on this one. So my good friend Austin Kelly is going to give his thoughts on this short. So take it away, Austin.
Austin Kelly here to talk about one of my favorite, God, I feel horrible saying that, but really is one of my personal favorite Frank Tashlin cartoons. Speaking of the Weather from 1937. Boy, this is a really interesting one because I didn't even know until I became a cartoon nerd that all of, or not all, but most of the animation in this thing was reused or traced or taken from earlier cartoons. And when I got into the community and I would talk to people about how much I like this thing, they were very negative about it because they were just, oh, well, all the animation is reused and stuff. And to that I say, not only couldn't I tell that the animation was reused, whereas in some cases it's very obvious where tracing is being done, like on a cartoon like Tick Tock Tuckered, which is almost entirely taken from earlier footage. But even if I could tell, that shouldn't detriment my ability to enjoy the thing. I know that people really don't like this one because it's around such classics like Case of the Stuttering Pig and Porky's Double Trouble, like these dramatic, horrifying masterpieces in black and white, almost film noir level brilliance from the brilliant Tashlin. But I really like this one, and I can't justify why without, I guess the reason is just that it's such a happy film. You know what I mean? It's just pure joy. There's really no conflict. I guess there is a burglar, but you never really feel like anyone's in danger or anything. So it's like, what's he even gonna do to these people? You know, like these happy Bookland characters. It's a really jolly cartoon, and it's a callback to the harmonizing days of just like happy things happening in the vacuum for 7 or 8 minutes. And Tashlin specifically called out Harmon and Ising as his main influences when making cartoons like this and You're an Education and Have You Got Any Castles, because they had done the books come to life idea in films like I Like Mountain Music. So he was looking specifically to them, and it really shows, because say what you want about harmonizing cartoons, and I agree that they're fairly uninteresting compared to the later Warner entries, but they're just happy films, you know? Everyone's bouncing to the beat, and everyone's smiling. They're having a great time. I get the same sense from Speaking of the Weather, and it really helps that it's it's like eye candy. I love the color styling in this one. And another thing I really like about it is the music. I think Carl Stalling knocks it out of the park with this. Just his constant reference of pop songs and classical songs and the J.S. Semechnik silent cues. There's a lot of great stuff to like. And even then, yeah, it's a fairly simple film, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. A lot of films are simple. I think most of Friz Freling's cartoons are very simple on the surface, but they're still great. Just a simple setup, but great stuff. And this is a fairly simple cartoon by Tashlin standards, where those Porky Pig cartoons I was talking about earlier that are so complex and have these wonderful, anti-cartoon plots, these horrible things, complex. You could make something like Porky's Double Trouble into a 90-minute feature with Humphrey Bogart or something, but no, this is just pure cartoon fun, and that's why I've always loved it. And I know that this one gets a lot of hate, but I'm a big fan of it. Anyway, something that always confused me was that the magazines, see the restored print, which has original titles reinstated from a 1937 release print, still the body of the cartoon has magazine release dates that are changed from the 30s to the 40s. And I always saw that and got confused, because if the restoration is from a print or from the 30s, then why are the magazine dates from the 40s? From what I heard, the restoration was just made from an original print for the titles only, and then the body of the cartoon was taken from a later, probably a better element or something. I assume the original 30s element where they got the original titles was in rougher shape, so they took one of the Blue Ribbon reissues for the body of the cartoon, but they reinstated the original titles from a 30s print. So that's why the magazine dates still say 1940 whatever. Now, someday, if someone else can find an original 30s release print, it would be interesting just to see the magazine dates with whatever they originally had, 1937, 1938, whatever, even if they were changed at all. I know the minutia doesn't matter on the larger scale, the titles and tiny edits and everything, but it's always intriguing to me, and hopefully to all you nerds out there who are not a big fan of this cartoon, but that doesn't mean that I can't be. So that's all I gotta say, and Austin out. And again, I love this one. It's a great cartoon. Really.
So thank you, Austin. And now my good friend Manny Cruz, the Toonie Tenor, is going to discuss the music in this short because, as I mentioned before, this focuses on promoting a song as part of the Merry Melodies program, which was still happening even in 1937. So take it away, Manny.
Hi, everyone. This is Manny Cruz with the latest edition of It's Time for Manny's Music Time with music trivia for you today. Bum! For the 1937 Merry Melody cartoon, Speaking of the Weather, directed by my fellow Jersey boy, Frankie Valli. Wrong Frank. Frank Tashlin. There you go. Weehawkins, pride and joy. So, what's interesting about the way that I've been recording the Manny's Music Time segments is that I'm going in chronological order. I'm still in 1934, near the end of the black and white Merry Melodies. I'm recording this February 4th, 2024. And it's cool that Anthony allowed me to jump ahead in the timeline since he's covering the Frank Tashlin shorts. And I love Frank Tashlin's cartoons. I really, really enjoy the Merry Melodies, especially of around this time period, like 36 until, I would say, the early 40s, when it still had the music gimmick going along. I don't know. There's just a charm to them that I really enjoy. But at the same time, it throws me off because I'm looking at the cue sheet and the songs that I want to talk about in the Manny's Music Time segment, but it's for a ton of cartoons that I will talk about eventually, so I don't want to spend my entire time today going into detail. I would just rather wait until those specific cartoons come on. So this is a more condensed version of my usual ramblings, so either consider this a blessing or a curse. most likely a blessing. And I know that Anthony's commentary in general about this cartoon is going to be stacked as it is with all the magazines and newspaper articles and caricatures that he has to deal with. So I will try to make his life and your life a little easier. So these are the cues that are in the cartoon itself. So obviously we start with Speaking of the Weather, which was composed by Harold Arlen, and the lyrics were by E.Y. Harburg.
Speaking of the weather, la-di-da-da.
Speaking of the weather, speaking of the weather, speaking of the weather, it isn't the humidity, it's you. Come Donner, come Blitzen, come Pitter or Pat.
What in thunder is thunder compared to my heart when it beats like that?
The song itself, I actually got to listen where it came from originally. So it's from the 1937 film Gold Diggers of, guess what year it is? 1937. So la-di-da. And it's a scene where Dick Powell is flirting with Joan Blondell. Inside, I'm assuming it's like an office, like a lawyer's office or whatever. And you see like a bunch of papers rattling around from the wind coming in. They have to close the doors because there's a thunderstorm outside and a lot of rain. I thought it was a very, very charming song. I mean, Dick Powell and Joan Blondell, I haven't seen too much of their stuff, but just great chemistry. And this is just my opinion, but I could see why Dick Powell... I mean, obviously he's part of the movie, but I think Joan Blondell is gorgeous, so I would be singing to her too. So let me go learn this song and sing it to a beautiful lady that, who knows, might look just like Joan Blondell. But yeah, I thought the original scene was charming, and it was cool to finally see it in the context of where it came from originally. And what's nice too is that the cartoon's on the Looney Tunes Golden Collection Volume 3, and you get to see it with its restored opening titles, because for many years it had the blue ribbon issue, which did not have the original cue on the opening credits, and you get to hear the title track in the opening credits. There's something in particular, as I was looking through some stuff around this time, like the 1937-1938 season of cartoons, I like how in the opening titles that the text of the cartoon itself and the credits are curved, and there's just something about I find it to be really, really neat. I mean, I was looking at the title card of The Woods Are Full of Cuckoos, another Tashlin cartoon. This one, I know that there's someone recently found, might have been Austin Kelly or Devin Baxter, one of the two. If I get it wrong, I apologize, fellas. But somebody found like the original title of With Plenty of Money in You, which is relevant to this commentary. There's something about that design choice they went with during the season that I really like. So once the cartoon starts, you hear a little bit of Summer Night with music by Harry Warren. You're going to hear that name pop up a lot in this particular talk. And I like the way it sounds here. I always think of Summer Night in particular from another Tashlin cartoon next year, 1938's Porky at the Crocodero, where you have the old guy singing it in the parody of Guy Lombardi. I think it was a Guy Lumbago and his Boiled Canadians. I'm just trying to remember it off the top of my head, but Mel Blanc singing that old Canadian guy, Summer Nights.
Summer night, starry skies, you can see my sweetheart with 1,000 eyes.
I should start singing like that, and look at that, the money will start rolling in. Speaking of money, oh my goodness, that was a perfect segue, and I didn't even plan that. So the next cue you hear is With Plenty of Money in You, with music by Harry Warren and lyrics by Al Dubin. I've spoken about Warren and Dubin in other previous commentaries, so please go check those out. Because, again, you're going to hear their names, and their cues have been used extensively. I would say they're the songwriting team that has been used the most in Warner Brothers shorts. They are the Lennon and McCartney of the Warner Brothers cartoons, and Carl Stallings just really dug their material. So you hear that during the scene where you see the Bob Burns caricature playing on the bazooka. And then it segues into the Ted Lewis caricature playing it on the clarinet, and then other characters are coming in. And And one thing that I really like is that you have the beaver jumping on the string bass, and he's slapping the bass itself to create the melody of the song itself. And that's going to lead me into a point that I want to talk about near the end. It's just something that Carl Stalling and Mel Franklin just do so tremendously well. And this cartoon is a good example of it. So then at the end of that little song and dance routine, you hear the Looney Tunes theme song, The Merry-Go-Round Broke Down, which was written by Cliff Friend and Dave Franklin. Not going to talk about it today, but obviously that and Merrily We Roll Along are probably the two most important pieces in Warner Brothers history. Obviously the theme songs of the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies. The Merry-Go-Round Broke Down became the Looney Tunes theme song in the same year, 1937, with the cartoon Rover's arrival. And you hear that very briefly. It's like kind of like a blink and you'll miss it moment where you see the caricature of Hugh Herbert. And he starts clapping his hands together. I always get a kick out of that impression of him. With Plenty of Money in You is a cartoon from the same year, 1937, by Fritz Freleng. And another 1937 cartoon is September in the Rain, with music by Warren and Dubin. And you see that when you see the caricature of Leopold Stokowski, and it's kind of neat how the rain is pouring, and apparently there's windshield wipers on sheet music. I mean, now in the 21st century with iPads, heaven forbid I get it wet while I'm trying to read sheet music off of it. That would be kind of handy. So you see that for a bit. And then when Stokowski starts conducting, you start hearing the storm sequence, the second part of the William Tell Overture. In a previous commentary that I recorded not too long ago, and I already forgot which one it is, of course, but go check them all out. They're great listening, okay? As your homework assignment, go do it. The William Tell Overture is broken up into 4 parts. You know, we're familiar mainly with parts 2, 3, 4. The second one is the one you hear in this cartoon, The Storm. The third one is The Call to the Cows. And the fourth and final part is the most famous, the William Tell Overture, the Lone Ranger part, the Swiss Army going into battle. And I'm actually looking at the file that I have of the cartoon itself, and I'm looking at the sheet music because I always get a kick out of when sheet music is depicted in cartoons. And it looks like The Storm by William Tell, and it looks like they don't even have the correct time signature or the correct key signature because this part of the overture is in the key of E minor. There's no sharp on the staff itself, so it could either be played in C major or A minor, and it looks like it's in 2/4 time, and I'm pretty sure. I mean, you could conduct that in 2 beats. But yeah, what's written on the sheet music, that is just like the bare bones thing. I mean, Stokowski would be reading an actual orchestral score as opposed to like, that looks like sheet music that one instrument would be playing, and it's absolutely nothing to what the actual orchestra is playing. And I see some of the eighth notes are drawn facing the wrong way. The note head is facing. All right, never mind. Music geek stuff. But, you know, it's kind of like these videos that I've seen recently where I've gotten a kick out of them, where it's like how people do not properly animate piano playing in animation. And it's like what they're playing, this is what it would actually sound like. And it sounds like a complete hot mess. And it's so rare to see animation depict piano playing properly because it's difficult. I know that in Soul, the Disney film, or sorry, the Pixar film from a few years ago, that they actually made the effort of depicting what the main character is playing the piano and the other characters, that it's the accurate notes that you hear are being played. So, but obviously that's a film from a few years ago. We have the technology to do that as opposed to doing it by sight back in the 1930s, which is extremely difficult. So I'm not going to beat them up for it. And then it leads into the whole sequence where you see the guy, the burglar, I should say, who's brilliantly voiced by the wonderful Billy Bletcher. And he starts causing trouble, and he tries to break into the safe. And then I think that's a Charlie Chan caricature, you know, stops him dead in his tracks. He confesses to his crime. He goes to jail. He busses himself out. And then the Walter Winchell caricature is like, hey, stop, Flash, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea, and all that stuff. And then the cavalry starts calling in, all the kids, the Boy Scouts do their thing. You got the Johnny Weissmuller. There's so many caricatures in this cartoon. So this is the sequence where you start hearing, it's just like rapid fire cues. So it starts off, you hear a little bit of Congo, which was composed by M.K. Jerome. And you start hearing it when the Weissmuller caricature starts pounding his chest. And then you see the scene that's I never saw on Cartoon Network as a kid until I got the Golden Collection DVD of the African natives charging at the screen. I believe that comes from Buddy of the Apes. It's interesting because cue-wise, it uses a lot of cues from previous cartoons or previous Merry Melodies, and there's just a ton of reused animations. This was Tashlin's first color cartoon, so he might have wanted to cut as many corners as he could for, I'm assuming, for budgetary reasons. So you hear a little bit of Congo, and then you see the ship, which I believe is again from a Buddy cartoon. You hear a little bit of the Song of the Marines, also composed by Warren and Dubin, and it was another piece of music that was premiered by Dick Powell in a film. And then you also go right into the scene where you see the Cowboys shooting. I think that's from Ride and Bosco. And you hear the music Cheyenne. Da, 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 da. It's commonly used in Western cartoons or Western scenes. And the music was written by Egbert Val Alstein. And then we go into one of my absolute favorite cues in history just because of the way it was done here. You hear Boulevardier from the Bronx, again a composition by Warren and Dubin, and that's also a cartoon that came out the previous year in 1936. And the cartoon Boulevardier from the Bronx is the first Warner Brothers cartoon to use Merrily We Roll Along as the theme song for the Merry Melodies. And I know that they reused this sequence in the later of the three cartoons that Tashlin did of Stuff Come to Life in Have You Got Any Castles, and just the way that Stalling and Franklin arranged and orchestrated this scene where you see the William Powell caricature walking towards the screen, and just the way, just how dragging it feels, and just the instrumentation they chose kills me every time I hear it. And it's funny, when I was watching this cartoon, I was like, wait a minute, the Powell goofy scene with Boulevardier from the Bronx playing, am I watching the right cartoon? But looks like Tashlin, struck gold twice and decided to reuse the same joke twice. I mean, he was pretty much doing what Friz Freleng does best. And then you see William Powell's dog, Asta. And as if you're not aware, and probably Anthony will bring it up in his commentary, that William Powell was the star of the Thin Man series of films, and he had a dog. And when you see Asta, you hear a little bit of another M.K. Jerome composition, My Little Buckaroo. I will go more into detail about that song in the cartoon of the same name, which comes out the later year, 1938.
That's my pop.
And then it goes into another rapid fire cue of A Hunting We Will Go, when Asta and Powell start sniffing the ground. I mean, I've never done that with Nina or any of the other dogs in my family, and I don't plan on doing it anytime soon. Of course, you hear a little bit of, oh, where is my little dog gone? That's when, of course, the Saturday Evening Post, ha, 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 LOL. And when William Powell decides to blindfold Asta, and it's like, the Hays Code might get after us for, actually going forward with a possible urination joke. So let's not. And then the cartoon later on is, the cartoon's wrapping up and they're going after the villain and blah, blah, blah. You hear All Is Fair in Love and War, once again by Harry Warren and Al Dubin. So again, I want to go more and more in details, but I already saw that this commentary is longer than it should be because, of course, I ramble, but I'm not going to dig more into that stuff. I'll leave them for the cartoons that feature these. I do want to talk about something in this cartoon that I think does extremely well, and it's talking about arrangement and orchestration. So, as we know, Carl Stalling was the music director at Warner Brothers from 1936 to 1958, and he was in charge of creating the arrangements, the scores for the cartoons. He did about 600 of them in his time at the studio. And Milt Franklin came in around the same year, 1936, and he would eventually take over as music director from Stalling when he retired in 1958. And Franklin started doing the arrangements for the cartoons himself in the early 50s after Stalling got injured in an accident. And then once he retired, he took over the duties until, sadly, Milt Franklin died during the production of The Jet Cage in 1962, the Sylvester and Tweety cartoon. So Stalling did the arrangements and Franklin did the orchestrations. And a lot of people tend to use those two words interchangeably, and I just want to clarify what those two mean. So, according to the On Music Online Dictionary, an arrangement is as follows: the selection and adaptation of a composition or parts of a composition to instruments for which it was not originally designed or for some other use for which it was not at first written. And even though it says instruments, you could also apply it to vocal things. So, for example, you have a song that you wrote it was a jazz song, okay? Jazz song, whatever it may be. And then you decide to rewrite it in a salsa, okay? Or you decide to, if it was originally written for like an instrumental composition. For example, I've been listening to Birdland by Weather Report that came out in 1977, a phenomenal piece of jazz fusion music. And then 2 years later, in 1979, a vocal group called the Manhattan Transfer did a vocal arrangement of the same song, because Birdland was originally an instrumental piece, and then they had someone write lyrics to Birdland, and then they re-recorded that version of the song. I love both versions of it, but that's an example of what arranging is. And that's what Stalling did. He took different pieces, stuff that he composed originally, stuff that he got from opera, from classical music, from jazz, and from the cues that he was able to use with the Warner Brothers library, and he pretty much picked and chose what he did. And what I just love so much about this cartoon in particular is that how well he arranges the songs that he uses. During the whole Ted Lewis scene of playing Plenty of Money in You, it's just very jazz-like. I noticed that during My Little Buckaroo, when you see the criminal in disguise in the stroller, he arranged My Little Buckaroo, instead of being played in a major key, he has it done in the minor key to let him know, oh, this guy, he's a robber, so on and so forth. But it's just, I love the way that he plays around with the meter, he plays around with the key, he plays around with the style. That's what arranging is, just taking something that's already been written and rewriting it in a different style, in a different tempo, in a different meter, going from this instrument to that instrument, so on and so forth. Now, Milt Franklin was in charge of the orchestration because, from what I know, Carl Stalling would write his arrangements on the piano. He would do one score a week. He would write it out in sheet music on a piano. He would play it, and then he would pass it along to Milt Franklin to do the orchestration. Now, this is the critical part. What is an orchestration? The definition is as follows: the art of arranging a composition for performance by an instrumental ensemble. Some compositions are originally intended for instrumental ensembles where the composer makes all decisions pertaining to instrumental assignments within the score. Which instruments play what notes and when to play them. This is often referred to as scoring the composition. Some compositions, such as Modest Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition, were originally written for a specific instrument, in this case piano, and are later set for a different combination of instruments, in this case Maurice Ravel's Orchestration for the Symphony Orchestra. The purpose of orchestration is often to provide a more vivid set of tone colors for a composition, or to give it a different ensemble of instruments access to the composition. An example would be for a pop's orchestra to play popular music originally composed for a rock band in a concert. So you're probably saying, Manny, that kind of sounds like an arrangement. But I think why an orchestrator is so crucial is that, yes, you could write an arrangement. And like I said, what Carl Stalling did is he wrote his arrangements on the piano, but then he passed it along to Milt Franklin to be the orchestrator, to say, all right, in this part, Carl wants With Plenty of Money in You done in a jazz style. But what instrument's going to play the melody? You know, we're going to do the clarinet. Or at this part, we're going to have the double bass play the melody. Or at this part, we're going to have, a saxophone do it. I mean, orchestrators and arrangers, some people do both parts. Like they arrange and they orchestrate themselves. But some people decide, you know what? Even though I wrote this arrangement, I want somebody else, especially someone who's very knowledgeable of instrument tone colors, or another word is timbre. It's like, what instrument would sound best playing the melody? What instrument would sound best playing the harmony? You know, if you're trying to go for a certain effect, like something comical or something scary or something romantic, what instrument would fit this part best? And I think that's what an orchestrator does. And that's why I feel sometimes that Milt Franklin doesn't get the credit he deserves, because everybody knows Carl Stalling. He wrote the arrangements and he did all that, and eventually Franklin would do it. But you got to give credit to Milt Franklin, who was a woodwind player. That was his background, and he had his own orchestras before he went to Warner Brothers. But what I love about these cartoons in particular is that the emphasis of woodwind instruments, and you know, you hear things like baritone saxophones and bass clarinets and bassoons and clarinets and flutes, and just how nice they sound and how it makes the music sound so much richer. In one of the Golden Collection things, it was Leonard Maltin, it might have been him or somebody else that said, when you watch you could not look at a Warner Brothers cartoon, you just listen to it and you know exactly what's going on based on what the music is telling you. And obviously, we got to give majority of the credit to what Carl Stalling did in picking the cues and also weaving it in with his own original music. But at the same time, it's like Franklin was the master of picking what instrument is going to be the most effective to get this part of the plot or the story or the joke across. And that's something to be commended about, and just something I love about this cartoon so much, that it does so well. Okay, this was much longer than I thought it was. Oh goodness, I need to have like a stopwatch in front of me, and you know, like the old-fashioned one with the button, like you're using like when you were doing gym class back in the day. So anyway, I mean, I haven't seen this cartoon in a while. It's not my favorite. It was all right. I think Have You Got Any Castles and You're an Education are better than this one, but just the music itself just popped out to me because of how well Stalling's arrangement and Franklin's orchestration was in this particular cartoon. And obviously many others, and that's why these cartoons are so great. So those are my thoughts for Speaking of the Weather. Thank you for listening to another edition of Manny's Music Time. Please follow me on social media at the Tuning Tenor, TheTooneyTenor, for more about my life as a musician and as a multifaceted geek. Thanks for listening, and so long, folks. And I guess I got to quote Ted Lewis here, but is everybody happy? Are you happy with what all this information I gave you? I'm giving it to you for free, folks. No, I'm kidding. I'm just being silly. Bye.
So thank you, Manny, and wow, there was so much to cover in this one, but is the short funny? Yeah. I don't care that it's a cheater, and a lot of people watching at the time wouldn't have cared either. It's only us obsessive nerds that would know that. I just find it interesting that he reused animation in this, and people would have gotten a kick out of all the celebrities at the time. But this is not my favorite of his 3 books that's coming to life trilogy that Tashlin did, but it's still a solid one that's pretty funny. So this one gets about 8.5 out of 10. I like this one. It's funny. I love stupid puns, and this cartoon's full of them. But yeah, that'll do it for this review. So thanks for watching, guys. Until next time, take care.